In a Nuzlocke challenge, any Pokemon that faints has to be boxed forever, and I'm gonna try to beat Pokemon Shield while only allowed to catch the first electric type I find per route. And I think the electric type could be one of the best monotypes in all of Galar. Why electric? Well, for starters, the first Pokemon we can find on Route 1 is Grubbin. This in and of itself isn't exactly game-breaking since Grubbin is not even an electric type. However, with the first gym's level cap being the highest of any Pokemon game at 20, we can instantly evolve Grubbin into Charjabug. From there, I start heading through the wild area since they changed Charjabug's evolution method from Gen 7, where you had to level up in Vast Pony Canyon, to now only requiring a Thunderstone, meaning it went from a Pokemon you can only acquire in the late game into an early game powerhouse we can fully evolve before the first gym, which predictably gets completely decimated. Sorry about that, Milo. But wait, how did we even get here? In the challenge, we're not allowed to use Grubbin until it evolves into Charjabug and turns into an electric type, so in the meantime, I catch myself a Yamper. And because we don't face any mandatory battles with ground moves, it's fairly easy for Bolt to take us to the first gym. Before the gym, we reach Route 4, where there are several possible encounters for us to pick up, but I decide to go for Eevee. The problem with evolving Eevee is it requires another Thunderstone, which at this point is only possible to acquire through the Digging Duo. And with my classic Antler Boy luck, I of course end up getting every possible stone you can get before I get my Thunderstone. With our new Thunderstone, we can get the objectively most awesome evolution, Jolteon. Please note that this is just my opinion, and it's completely fine to disagree, but you are on the wrong side of history. Once we've got Jolteon, I make sure to pick up the Expert Belt in Turfield to power up our super effective bug moves against Milo even further, and you know the rest. We then prepare for Nessa, which is possibly our best matchup in the entire game. On our way to take her on, we pass through the daycare where we can pick up Toxel. Both this Pokemon and Axew are the closest to sharing my name, so it's always had a special place in my heart. In my Sword and Shield Nuzlocke rules, I'm not allowed to Dynamax, and this puts me at a massive disadvantage against the gym leaders. Admittedly, my strategy against Nessa is not perfect, since I could have easily gotten confused by this Water Pulse and had to switch around to shake off confusion, which would have caused me to take a bit more damage before we knock out Goldeen. The big problem here is that Vikavolt, despite looking insanely fast, has a very low base speed. This is to balance out its insane special attack stat of 143, which is extremely ridiculous. Unfortunately, this means we're not going to be faster than Nessa's Dreadnought, which thankfully doesn't actually have any rock moves, and its strongest move against us is Max Strike. At our current HP, there's no way this ever takes us out, even with a critical hit, and we can simply finish off Dreadnought with a quad-effective Energy Ball. I'm sure there are plenty of parallel universes where I got both confused and flinched by Arrokuda's bite, but not this time, Nessa. Oleana then invites us to go to the local restaurant to eat with the chairman.
Naturally, if one's going to eat here, the obvious choice is the local cuisine. Everything on the menu is delicious.
Before leaving Holbury, I make sure to do some fishing. There's only one electric type we can pick up this way, but with the next gym leader coming up being a fire type master, Chinchou is the perfect encounter to get. What's especially perfect about it is it evolves into Lantern at the exact level cap of 27. And as a bonus, we're also able to evolve Yamper into Boltund. Kabu is where things start to get serious in Sword and Shield. Unlike Milo and Nessa, he's got a Gigantamax form, and Centiskorch has some seriously devastating moves. I decide to lead with Boltund and instantly nuzzle the Ninetales to get it paralyzed. Ninetales even ends up getting fully paralyzed, basically giving me a free turn. I then go for a Spark to take it below half, and this time Ninetales connects with Will-O-Wisp. Getting burned is obviously the worst possible fate for a physical attacker like Boltund, so I came prepared with a Rostberry to heal it off. A second Spark isn't quite enough to take Ninetales out, but because it gets fully paralyzed again, we get to take it out for free. Now, in the Hardcore Nuzlocke rules, we have to enter each gym fight at or below the level cap, but we are allowed to level up during the fight, which in this case is incredibly useful since Boltund learns Charm at level 28, which in my opinion is one of the better support moves in any Nuzlocke. And in this case, with Kabu's two remaining Pokemon both being physical attackers, it's the perfect move to learn. After getting intimidated by Arcanine, Boltund isn't going to be dealing great damage, so instead I go for Nuzzle to get it paralyzed as well. Just like Ninetales, Arcanine has Will-O-Wisp, so for as long as I'm not burned, I'm going to try to deal as much damage as possible with Spark, getting Arcanine down in into the yellow. I then start going for Charm to lower Arcanine's attack all the way to -6 to set us up perfectly for our switch into Lantern. We do end up getting burned in the process, but Boltund isn't here to do damage anymore, and I swap out into Chow. Not exactly one of my more memorable Sonic characters, but I kinda thought it looked like Lantern. Arcanine gets paralyzed on the switch, so we get to switch in Lantern for free, and it then goes for Will-O-Wisp, which we don't really care about since we're a special attacker. From there, I start stockpiling to boost our defense as much as we can. This early in the game, we're not going to be able to tank G-Max moves very well, and if we start switching around, we're just going to be sacking team members left and right. You'll find that one of the most effective strategies against the bosses in Gen 8 is to try and just outlast the 3 turns of Dynamax to take on the normal Pokemon. If you're not boosting your attacking stats, it's really hard to one-hit KO Dynamax Pokemon with all that extra health. The problem with that is Dynamax moves often boost the Pokemon's stats, making it more and more difficult to deal with for every single turn. One of the tools we can use to try and survive is Protect, which protects us from some damage, but some of it still gets through, and it gets its stat boosting effect, or in this case, lowering our special attack. It's of course not very effective to use Protect twice in a row, so I just tank the second max Flutterby, and since it lowers my special attack, there's no point trying to deal damage, so after getting some health back from a Citrus Berry, I try to get Scentiscorch paralyzed with Thunder Wave, but end up missing. This is a huge bummer, since Paralysis would have been extremely useful here, but instead, I'm just gonna have to go for another Protect to tank the final G-Max move, which finally causes Scentiscorch to go back to its normal size. With the power of its moves now heavily reduced and the health we got back from Citrus Berry, I can comfortably tank a Bug Bite and go for a Thunder Wave to get it paralyzed once and for all. At this point, we pretty much have to switch out, so I send in Boltund. I end up getting smoke screened on the switch here, which doesn't matter at all since Charm doesn't care about accuracy drops. Once I've then lowered Scentiscorch's attack enough, I swap out into Sonic, who's able to take Scentiscorch into the red with a few Shadow Balls before we take enough damage from a -4 Bug Bite that we're actually dead to crit the following turn. Just to play it safe, I swap out of Sonic into Quicksilver and finish the job with a Thunderbolt. Definitely our hardest fight so far, but at least we still have all of our Pokemon and our 3rd gym badge. Once we reach Hammerlock, we can start picking up some really good items. I begin by cheesing the fight versus Black Belt Brian, who thinks he can get a free turn by using a Focus Sash, but we can easily finish off his Cottony with a multi-hit move like Pin Missile to beat him in 1 turn anyway. For beating him, Brian gives us a Focus Sash, which is a single-use item that we can only get 2 of in the entire game, so we're gonna have to use it sparingly. I then make sure to pick up the old letter from Paula that'll be very useful later, and of course the Wise Glasses that are right next to her. We then reach Route 6, where I make sure to pick up a Helioptile. With a Ghost-type gym coming up, this little guy being a secondary normal type is actually huge. And because we already have a Sunstone from when I was trying to get a Thunderstone from the Digging Duo, we can immediately evolve it into Heliolisk. I'm also able to evolve Dash into Amped Form Toxtricity before finding this guy arguing to his Diglett that Vaporeon is the greatest evolution. That's right, you tell him, Diglett. Because we're playing Shield, we take on Allister instead of B, which in this case is actually much scarier. The Max Ghost move boosts special attack, and a special attack boosted Gengar sounds like a recipe for a lost Nuzlocke to me, so I make sure to lead with Quicksilver and set up Sticky Web the very first turn. Even though Vikavolt is an amazing special attacker, it does actually get Crunch, and with a physical attack of 70, it's not even that bad. The only unfortunate part is Yamask uses Disable, which means I waste a ton of turns not being able to hit it with Thunderbolt before Disable wears off, and I'm finally able to take it out with another Crunch. Cursula comes out next, and I immediately go for Volt Switch to get a bit of damage as I swap out into Dash. Cursula uses Curse on the Switch, which is actually very thematic, but it's not quite enough for it to take itself out, and in order to not take 25% of my health at the end of every single turn, I make sure to just take it out with Volt Switch so I get to swap out and get rid of the Curse. With Mimikyu coming in, I swap out into Sonic, who immediately swaps out again with Volt Switch to take out Mimikyu's Disguise. I once again switch in Dash to have an upper hand against this Fairy type, and it just boosts its attack and accuracy with Hone Claws. Unfortunately, a super effective Sludge Bomb isn't quite enough to take Mimikyu out, although I do get it poisoned before I'm hit by Slash. This triggers my Citrus Berry, getting me back to a nice and healthy amount of HP before I finish Mimikyu out with another Sludge Bomb. It's also important to note that Dash has a plus speed nature. The only reason this matters is it allows Dash to outspeed Gengar after the Sticky Web drop. My basic idea with having a poison type in here is we don't want Gengar to go for G-Max Ooze. That's what we're trying to avoid basically at all costs. So with a Pokemon to resist poison in and then swapping out with Volt Switch, I'm expecting it to go for Shadow Ball, but the AI sadly doesn't take my bait, which not only damages Heliolisk, but also gives Gengar that special attack boost that I wanted to avoid. This is very very bad. Unfortunately, all I can do is still go through with the plan, which is outspeed Gengar because of the sticky web and go for Eerie Impulse to lower its special attack by 2 stages. This gets it to -1, allowing me to survive the max darkness, but after the special defense drop, I have to switch out, going for Volt Switch, and sending in Bolt, who can always survive a non-crit with Gengar at -1, meaning we should be good to go and can just finish off Gengar with a crunch. But unfortunately, Gengar had other plans. And with a critical hit Max Ooze, the deathless dream is over. What's worse is Boltund was probably my most prized Pokemon on the team, being the only physical attacker we have and the best physical attacking electric type in the game. With Strong Jaw and access to most Fang moves, plus the Choice Band we get later in the game, I was super excited to use it, but instead I'm reminded that sometimes Nuzlockes take away your favorites, and there's nothing you can do about it. Forced to move on after that bittersweet victory, I hand over the old letter to this guy, who gives me the first of the 3 best items in the game, the Choice Scarf. And because we're now in desperate need of a new team member after the tragic loss of Boltund, I take a quick detour before taking on Opal to the Isle of Armor. Here on Challenge Beach, we can get the perfect counter to her fairy type's Magnemite. And with a 3rd Thunderstone, we can immediately evolve it into Magnezone. This sets us up more than perfectly to take on Opal, who, if you know what you're doing, should be completely free almost always. In this case, the only thing a Weezing can do to Magnezone is go for Fairy Wind or Tackle, which are both resisted. The strategy is then to go for Protect to stall out as many turns as possible so we get to answer all the questions, which, if we answer them right, gets all of our stats to +2. From there, we simply outspeed every single one of our Pokemon and can one-shot all the first 3, and while we don't have quite enough damage to one-shot Alcremie, it can't really do any damage back, and we can take it out the following turn. At this point, we need to worry about Melanie's ice types, and the best Pokemon I can think of to pick up is Electrike. With the level cap so high, we can instantly evolve it into Manectric, which is one of the few electric types that actually gets access to good fire moves. Before we reach Circhester, we have to pass through a few routes, and on Route 7, I make sure to pick up Galvantula. Then on Route 8, we can pick up the Pokemon Run and Bun All-Star Togedemaru. Oh, and then there's this guy who thought there was no possible way he could lose despite his team being a singular Snom. Just like versus Opal, we have a really good matchup into Melanie with Manectric. Unlike Opal though, who basically handed us the win with all those boosts, here we've got to do a little bit more work. With a held Expert Belt, Flamethrower is able to knock out both of Melanie's first 2 Pokemon. Ice-Q is able to tank 1, but only sets up Hail. This lets me take it out with a Flamethrower the following turn, only leaving the real problem, her G-Max Lapras. Despite Lapras being weak to Electric, this is still a bit problematic since it's so incredibly bulky on its own, plus the extra health from G-Max, that there's no way we'd ever knock it out in one hit. As per usual, this means we have to outlast the Dynamax, so I go for Protect with Manectric in order to take a bit less damage from G-Max Resonance. Unfortunately, this sets up Aurora Veil, making Lapras even more bulky. In fact, it makes my super effective Volt Switch the following turn look resisted before I swap out into Lantern. This way, we can easily tank the resisted G-Max Resonance and then Protect to take less damage from the Max Geyser. Finally, we've managed to stall out all 3 of Lapras's G-Max turns and it goes back to its normal size. However, with both Aurora Veil and the Rain still up, I'm in no rush to swap in something else since I can resist all of Lapras's moves with Lantern. After getting some health back from chomping on a Citrus Berry, I finally see what I've been waiting for as Lapras puts me to sleep with Sing. Because we're now asleep, Lapras won't go for Sing again, so I can safely swap in Silver. With the Dry Skin ability, we are not afraid of this thing going for water moves even in the rain, but unfortunately, we immediately get hit by a crit Ice Beam. Now that Aurora Veil is gone, I can deal a lot more damage with Volt Switch and swap out into Magnezone. Unfortunately, the zone gets immediately put to sleep, but now that the rain is gone, I feel comfortable switching out and sending in Togedemaru. Even without the rain, the Surf on the Switch deals a ton of damage. I'm very glad we didn't get crit since we can just finish off the Lapras with a Zing Zap and get our 6th gym badge. And with Melanie defeated, we can finally get the Water Rotom Bike. And this thing is a huge pickup since it allows us to get some of the best items in the game, like the Choice Band. And now that we have a Choice Band, we need to make sure to pick up some new physical attackers, like for instance more Pico on Route 9. We then have to take on Piers, but because he doesn't Dynamax and the fact that we have 2 bug types on our team, the poor guy gets completely and utterly destroyed. Unfortunately, this means we need to prepare for the double battle versus Raihan, so I start by picking up the choice specs. Because we can now reach the Lake of Outrage, I unfortunately thought we'd be able to have Rotom at this point, but because we catch it at the lowest level of 55, there's no way we could actually use it before the level cap of the second Raihan fight. Not having Rotom is gonna make the 8th gym fight versus Raihan insanely difficult, and unfortunately my trip to the Lake of Outrage only results in getting a Focus Sash and of course picking up the Assault Vest. Because we now need a different strategy, I make my way back to the Isle of Armor to Pot Bottom Desert to pick up a Shinx. Even without Intimidate, Luxray's attack stat of 120 is insanely useful. However, because our Shinx does have Intimidate, it can play a crucial role in the double battle versus Raihan. Preparing for double battles in a Nuzlocke is more than twice as difficult than singles, and Raihan has an incredibly solid team with a Dynamax Pokemon that has one of the greatest typings in the game. I decide to lead with Luxray and Vikavolt, and this strategy is slightly risky. Luxray is really just here to Intimidate for the first turn since we won't be dealing very much damage after Flygon goes for Breaking Swipe to lower both our Pokemon's attack. The reason we're not afraid to stay in against Flygon is it doesn't have any ground moves, which actually doesn't make it very dangerous. So instead of going for something like a Choice Banded Ice Fang to try and deal with it as fast as possible, I Volt Switch into Gigalith to send out Lantern before taking it out with an Energy Ball. This brings in Sandaconda at the end of the turn, and Flygon goes for another Breaking Swipe to start off the next turn to lower both of our Pokemon's attack, which doesn't really matter since neither's a physical attacker. Vikavolt is always able to survive a critical hit Fire Fang from Sandaconda, so we're safe to stay in and just go for Ice Beam to take out Flygon, and then immediately follow that up with an Energy Ball at the end of the turn, which instantly takes out Sandaconda in one hit, leaving Raihan with only his final Pokemon, making this a 2v1. Raihan's most logical move would be to go for Max Rockfall into my bug type, so I send in Blaze once again to lower its attack with an Intimidate before we get hit, which of course does not end up mattering since we get crit anyway. Fortunately, this is a crit that we are able to survive, and Chao can go for Volt Switch at the end of the turn to swap out. This way, we can switch into Silver Surfer at the end of the turn instead of the very start. With Blaze now at critically low HP, I swap out and send in Togedemaru. I'm expecting a Max Knuckle here into Silver Surfer, but because we don't take damage from Sandstorm, Silver Surfer still has its Sturdy up, so even a critical hit wouldn't be a problem. And staying in with Magnezone is very beneficial to get off that Thunder Wave, which will allow it to outspeed the following turn. With Knuckles at full HP, I go for Protect so that the now neutral Max Knuckle won't hurt as much. I then Volt Switch out with Magnezone just to get a bit of extra chip damage and send in Lantern. I was kind of expecting Max Knuckle to go into Magnezone, but it does target Knuckles, so I'm very glad I went for Protect. After Duraludon's 3 Dynamax turns, it is at +1 attack, which is a bit scary. I don't have anything I can reasonably switch in, so I go for a Paraflinch with Zing Zap, but it's actually Lantern that comes in with a clutch critical hit Ice Beam to finish off the fight, granting me a much easier than expected final gym badge. With Raihan defeated, basically the only preparation I can make before the Elite Four is finally capturing Rotom. Because this thing keeps the electric type between all of its forms, it gives us a lot of type versatility. Much like Piers, his little sister is someone we have a great type advantage against. I start by setting up Sticky Web against her Liepard and then taking it out with a Bug Buzz. Scrafty comes out next, and I switch out with a Volt Switch to get a bit of chip damage and send in Lantern, who can take it out with Dazzling Gleam after the chip. I then switch to Luxray, who can handle the next 2 Pokemon, first Toxicroak with a Psychic Fangs, and once she sends in more Pico, I outspeed because of Sticky Web and take it out with a Superpower. This only leaves Grimmsnarl, and after Sticky Web, it's extremely slow, so I can outspeed with Volt Switch and send out Silver Surfer. Because of Sturdy, it doesn't matter if Grimmsnarl gets a critical hit, since we'll always survive at 1 HP no matter what. Because of Magnezone's Steel typing, I'm not expecting Grimmsnarl to go for an ineffective Max Starfall, so I swap in my Dark type to resist G-Max Snooze. This time, I am baiting Max Starfall, so I go for yet another Volt Switch to swap out into Toxtricity in order to resist the fairy move. Grimmsnarl then runs out of Dynamax, and we can easily finish it off with a super effective Sludge Bomb. With an easy victory against Marty, we next have the final battle versus Hop, and just like versus our previous opponent, I make sure to lead with the Galvantula and set up Sticky Web. I then start Volt Switching around until I take out Double with Manectric. Because of Volt Switch, I get to send in Luxray just before Hop sends in Snorlax, which is very easily defeated with a single superpower. He next sends in Pincurchin, which is an electric type so pathetic in a game full of awesome electric types that I have no idea why Hop is running it. His final Pokemon before Dynamax is Corviknight, which is of course easily destroyed with any electric type move. Finally, we only have to deal with his Dynamax Rillaboom. Because of the Sticky Web, we can outspeed with Volt Switch to get a bit of chip damage before we swap out into Vikavolt. This way, Hop wastes his first Dynamax turn by going from Max Quake into Levitate. Because of the Choice Scarf Sticky Web combo, I'm able to outspeed Rillaboom with a Bug Buzz and deal tons of damage. Unfortunately, Rillaboom does have Max Strike, and while it doesn't do too much damage, it does lower our speed, allowing it to outspeed the next turn to get a second move in a row with Max Darkness. Thankfully, it's just not that much damage for us to take, and even a critical hit Max Darkness wouldn't have been a problem, so we can finish off Rillaboom with a Bug Buzz to claim our victory against Hop. Unfortunately, our Pokemon League win streak is interrupted because Chairman Rose has decided to destroy the world because Oleana decided to date Steven instead of him. Okay, how did we end up here? First you broke up with Taylor Swift.
Well, she broke up with me.
Then you started dating Skyla.
Well, no, I got rejected.
And somehow you've gone from those two to dating Oleana?
All right, she's a terribly misunderstood woman, and why are you always giving me this rubbish? I never see you talking to a woman.
It's not like you're undateable.
Which hobby makes a guy undateable?
Pokemon.
Never mind. Oleana's team is pretty random, and by far the biggest threat is her G-Max Garbodor. To deal with Frostlass, I can easily just Choice Scarf Manectric to take it out with Flamethrower, which means I'm forced to swap out as soon as she sends in Milotic, since I can't change my move. I then switch into Lantern, who's slower than Milotic and thus has to tank a Surf since it's the only attacking move this thing can use, before swapping back out into Manectric with Volt Switch and taking Milotic out with a Discharge. This baits in Salazzle, so I send in Lantern, who gets poisoned on the switch, and then takes out Salazzle in one single Scald. To deal with Serena, her second to last Pokemon, I simply swap into Magnezone, who can easily tank Trop Kicks for days and doesn't care about the attack drops. The perfect thing about taking Serena out with Magnezone is it's going to bait Max Quake from Garbodor. Because I can simply dodge that with Levitate and take no damage at all, I basically get to waste a G-Max turn for free. My Bug type of course baits Max Rockfall, so I can just send in one of my two Steel types to easily face tank it. Togedemaru of course baits Max Quake again, which we nullify once more with Levitate. This means the end of Oleana's Dynamax turns, and I swap in Togedemaru as she goes for Toxic Spikes. The 6-head strategy here is going for Magnet Rise as soon as I swap in, since we're still cripplingly weak to Stomping Tantrum, thus making us completely immune to ground. And from there, there's nothing that can stop us from taking out the trash. Before we get to continue taking on the Elite Four, we're unfortunately interrupted by Bede, who's now become a Fairy-type trainer instead of Psychic. Much like against Oleana, we can easily take care of his lead by just going for Flamethrower with Manectric. Then once he sends in Gardevoir, I can't outspeed, so I swap out into Knuckles. Togedemaru doesn't actually have any Steel-type moves at this point, so it takes me a bit of time and a lot of HP in order to take Gardevoir out, but eventually we get there. Rapidash comes out next, and because it's Bede's final Pokemon before his G-Max, I decide to swap out into Magnezone, who gets hit by a Psycho Cut. I then set up a substitute and follow it up with a Light Screen. Unfortunately, what happens next is tragic. Rapidash breaks my substitute, which is expected, and I was going to set up my substitute the following turn again. However, I end up suffering from success by critting Rapidash with Flash Cannon. This is pretty unfortunate, since having the substitute up would have let me tank a lot more against Hatterene. Instead, we're stuck out in the open without a substitute, and the only thing stopping us from being turned to dust by a Max Flare is our Light Screen. With Max Flare setting up the sun, the next hit is gonna be twice as powerful, so I've got to swap out, sending in Dash. Light Screen actually makes it do less than half, so I'm expecting Hatterene to go for Max Mindstorm and thus swapping in my Dark-type Morpeko. Our immunity to Psychic completely wastes the final turn of Dynamax, and I go for a Volt Switch before Hatterene hits me with a Dazzling Gleam. This way, we can let our Poison type tank the Fairy attack before finishing Hatterene off with a Sludge Bomb the following turn. And with that, we finally get to take on the Elite Four for real. The Nessa fight might seem like it should be completely free, but with Pelipper setting up both Rain and possibly Tailwind, wind, we need to be very careful. She leads with Golisopod, so I send in Galvantula to immediately set up the Sticky Web. This unfortunately causes me to take a metric boatload of damage before doing so. I can then safely go for Electro Ball since I'm not going to get hit by any of Golisopod's moves after it gets forced out with Emergency Exit. This brings out Seeking, and I can't actually one-shot this thing even with Thunder, so I opt for Volt Switch so that I don't have to get hit and taken out. I swap in Togedemaru, who tanks a resisted Mega Horn like it's nothing, and the combined damage of Iron Barbs and Rocky Helmet is actually enough to take Seeking out amazingly. This brings in Barraskewda, and even after a Sticky Web drop, this thing is still crazy fast, and because my Toga has a speed-dropping nature, I can't actually outspeed it. So instead, I've got to swap in Quicksilver, who can of course dodge the incoming Drill Run because of Levitate. Fortunately, Vikavolt is so bulky that Liquidation can't take me out even with a crit, and we're of course strong enough that Volt Switch easily takes out the frail Barraskewda while letting us swap in the process. I decide to send in Togedemaru as Nessa sends back in Golisopod. To not take unnecessary damage from first impression here, I go for Protect, but Golisopod just goes for Liquidation. I want to send in Lantern against Pelipper, so I decide to take out Golisopod with a Volt Switch so I can send Lantern in before Pelipper comes out, of course setting up the rain in the process with Drizzle. I then make sure to just stall for 4 turns, making sure to use Protect every other, and finish off Pelipper with a Volt Switch so that I can swap out into Magnezone right before the rain stops and before she sends in her Dreadnought. With Magnezone at full HP, we're guaranteed to take the hit, and Dreadnought goes for Max Darkness. Because we're slower and I don't want to waste a turn switching out, I make sure to use Volt Switch so that we can switch out immediately. The bonus is of course that we deal tons of damage in doing so with Choice Specs Magnezone. From there, all we gotta do is tank another Max Darkness with Lantern and finish the fight. Elite Four Allister might actually be our best matchup in the game. Every single one of this guy's Pokemon is weak to Dark, so I just needed to find a way to exploit that with a Dark type on my team. Like most other fights, I start with Sticky Web, and Dusknoir conveniently wastes its turn by going for Disable, which is completely useless since I don't need to use Sticky Web again. I then Volt Switch out and send in Togedemaru, expecting a Rock Tomb. The Rock move of course barely does any damage at all against my Steel type, but what I didn't account for is Dusknoir is going to go for Rock Tomb until it's faster, which is a bit of a problem since we outspeed with Volt Switch as we send in Morpeko. For Morpeko to be faster than Gengar after Sticky Web, we can't have our speed dropped by Rock Tomb, so I'm forced to Volt Switch once again and send back in my Togedemaru. Conveniently, I get hit by a Rock Tomb on the switch, and it only requires one more for us to be slower. I then go for Protect to make sure Dusknoir won't go for Rock Tomb, and sure enough, it goes for Shadow Punch to try and deal more damage. Now that I know what Dusknoir is going to do, I can swap back in Morpeko, who gets hit by a Shadow Punch, which of course isn't very effective against our Dark typing. And from here, we're conveniently set up for success. With Morpeko's Choice Band boosting its attack by 50%, none of Allister's Pokemon can handle a Stab Crunch, not even Gengar, which we through our meticulous methods made sure to outspeed. And with Allister defeated, I made sure to pick up the Rotom catalog in Wyndon so that we can change Rotom's form, but for the fight versus Raihan, we actually don't want to change it. This time, Raihan wants to take us on in a single battle, which is much more manageable to plan for, and he's got a strategy that's extremely easy to cheese. Because his Torkoal immediately sets up the sun, he thinks he can hit me with a Solar Beam penalty-free, but because I'm faster, I can just set up a Rain Dance, which not only instantly turns his Solar Beam into a pathetic 2-turn move, but also doubles the power of my upcoming Scald, which easily takes Torkoal out in one hit. Because we're an electric type, this baits in Flygon, and while I expected it to go for Sandstorm exactly the way it does since Raihan's AI seems to love to prioritize weather, I made sure to give Lantern one of our Focus Sashes since that would have allowed us to survive at 1 HP and finish off the Flygon with an Ice Beam. We would have of course still survived since if it went for Earthquake, there'd be no sand for us to take that final bit of chip damage. Goodra comes in next and predictably sets up the rain, so I get a free Ice Beam. Goodra then hilariously tries to Thunder into my Volt Absorb, which heals the little bit of Sandstorm chip that we actually took, giving me another free Ice Beam to take Goodra into the yellow. After my next Ice Beam, Raihan goes for a full restore, and my Ice Beam on the heel actually gets a freeze. I definitely didn't need this to take Goodra out since it doesn't have any good moves to hit me with, but getting the freeze just means I take no damage at all, and we're at full HP as we face Turtonator. I expect this thing to set up the sun, so no knowing I'll outspeed, I go for a Scald to almost do half, and I then follow it up by setting up the Rain the following turn, which Turtonator completely wastes by going for Shell Trap. Now that Rain is boosting the power of my water moves, I can deal more than enough damage to take Turtonator out, which only leaves Raihan's final Pokemon, Gigantamax Duraludon. Now I was expecting him to go for Max Knuckle here since it kinda makes sense. He'd be boosting his attack, and it's a very powerful move based off of Body Press. However, knowing his AI loves to set up weather effects, I really should have expected the Max Rockfall here to get rid of the rain and set up Sand. However, with Rotom surviving, this still puts me in an optimal position, allowing me to just Volt Switch and knowing that it's never going to go for Body Press, switch in Luxray, which gets me an Intimidate drop, which makes it easy to tank the next Max Rockfall. Duraludon is surprisingly faster than Luxray, so I have to hard switch out, sending in Magnezone. This way, I resist G-Max depletion and take barely any damage at all as I waste the final turn of Gigantamax. Now that I'm baiting a Body Press, I can swap into Rotom, and this is exactly why we needed it to stay a Ghost type so that we'd be immune to the Fighting type move. I then Volt Switch out for some chip damage and send in Togedemaru, and the plan here is basically just to shuffle in between these two to deal as much damage as possible with Iron Barbs and Rocky Helmet. I can always safely swap back into Rotom because Togedemaru baits Body Press. This then creates a perfect loop of destruction where I'm now baiting Dragon Claw again and can Volt Switch for chip damage into Togedemaru and get to take Duraludon out for free with the Iron Barbs Rocky Helmet combo. Oleana pleads with me to deal with her heartbroken boss that's hellbent on destroying the world. And who am I to resist destroying someone in a Pokemon battle, especially when it'll be this easy? Rose is a Steel-type trainer, and unfortunately for him, all of his Pokemon are slower than Manectric. Another trait that they share is that they all fall to a single Choice Specs boosted Flamethrower from Manectric. That is, all of his Pokemon except for his Gigantamax Copperajah. This stupid elephant has a monstrous HP stat that we just can't burn through. So instead of just melting it instantaneously, we're gonna have to stall out the Gigantamax turns. However, this is incredibly easily done since we can get the first one for free by just switching into Flash and dodge it with Levitate. We then swap into Magnezone, which accomplishes two things for us. For one, we're never going to get taken out because of Sturdy, and my thinking at least was that we'd be baiting Max Quake, but the AI completely outsmarts me here and goes for Max Steel Spike, which still barely does any damage at all. Regardless, with Copperajah's Gigantamax turns depleted, we can simply take it out with an Overheat to end Rose's rampage. This leaves us with only one fight left in the game versus the champion. And Leon is a surprisingly tricky foe. He's got some of the strongest Pokemon from all kinds of generations, and my hope is to avenge Boltund with a deathless fight. Leon sends in Aegislash, and as per usual, I send in Galvantula. The guy then completely throws by going for King Shield, allowing me to set up Sticky Web completely unpunished. Now that I know it won't King Shield, I can go for Volt Switch to swap out and send in more Pico, expecting a Shadow Ball. We can of course resist that very comfortably with our Dark type, and even if Aegislash goes for a King Shield here to lower our attack, we do have a Choice Band in order to be able to take it out, but we simply get away with it without any King Shield shenanigans. Haxorus comes out next, and with Earthquake, this thing is incredibly scary to our team. It's also got Mold Breaker, meaning it can Earthquake Pokemon with Levitate, which is why I'm using Rotom's Flying form. Mold Breaker can't actually get around type immunities, and because of Sticky Web, we're able to outspeed Haxorus and get it burned with Will-O-Wisp before it locks itself into Outrage. If Will-O-Wisp missed, we would have been able to survive Outrage and gotten one more chance to burn it, but that would have cost us Rotom. There's really no other way to beat this thing since Earthquake just deals with all of our Pokemon, and Outrage does a ton of damage as you can see, even as a resisted hit. Without burn, that would have done over half to a Steel type. After getting a Rocky Helmet damage on the switch, I go for a Spiky Shield so that Haxorus's Outrage makes it hurt itself. We're also racking up damage with burn, the only problem is that Haxorus gets confused even though we protected. I of course immediately have Knuckles go for Magnet Rise so that we become immune to Earthquake. It's also perfect that Haxorus doesn't hit itself in confusion since we really don't want Leon to go for a full restore. From there, I go for a Zing Zap just to deal as much damage as possible, and in hindsight, Zing Zap is a terrible move to go for since I really wanted to get hit by Haxorus's Outrage. In the end, Outrage does connect, and we take it out with a Rocky Helmet damage, which sends in Inteleon. Sticky Web is huge here since Inteleon is extremely fast, and I decide to go for Zing Zap, which I end up really having to regret since I just barely fall short of the KO. I should have just gone for Volt Switch and swapped Knuckles out for someone with full HP like Sonic or Tails who even has a focus sash. But no, instead I let you down, Bolt. I failed to beat the champion Deathless. And unfortunately, through such a stupid error. As Leon heals up with a full restore, I swap out of Tails into Sonic. And the stupid Spy Lizard won't be hurting anyone anymore as I take it out with another Volt Switch from Sonic. This way, I get to send in Magnezone for free as Leon sends in Dragapult. This is one of the game's strongest Pokemon, and because of Clear Body, it doesn't get its speed dropped from Sticky Web, which is incredibly annoying. What's also annoying is having your Assault Vest Magnezone get instantly crit by a Flamethrower, meaning you can't take another hit, but at least I Volt Switched out into Sonic. Speed is the name of the game, and Sonic ends up outspeeding with a Choice Specs Shadow Ball, which is more than enough to take the scary dragon out. Mr. Mime comes out second to last, and I realize I can set up Shadow for a really nice play. Expecting a Psychic, I can swap in for free with my Dark typing, and then swap into Hangry Mode at the end of the turn. This way, as I lock myself into Aura Wheel with my Choice Band, it'll be a Dark type move when I hit Mr. Rhyme, and conveniently, it raises my speed to be just faster than Charizard, which doesn't get affected by Sticky Web. Aura Wheel also turns into an Electric type move as we change into our full Belly Mode, and with our Choice Band, all we gotta do is, once again, just barely fall short of the KO. It was so close. It was so close to being the best Morpeko moment of all time. At least you got the chance to solo Allister, buddy. I'm sorry it had to end like this. With both Knuckles and Shadow defeated by Leon, there's only one who can set things right. With one final Choice Specs boosted Thunderbolt, Sonic takes out Charizard, avenging his friends in the process, and once and for all beating a Pokemon Shield Hardcore Nuzlocke using only electric types. And I gotta say, I wasn't too shocked at how powerfully these electric types performed. Through a little bit less reckless play and possibly with a bit more luck, we definitely could have gotten this Deathless. But that's the thing about Nuzlockes, things never quite go as planned. And hey, we still managed to beat Pokemon Shield. But I kind of feel like I'm forgetting somebody who's really important and I feel like I should have remembered. Oh my god, I forgot Arctozolt.